With the season winding down, the stakes are heating up. We have an updated college football playoff bracket, but how similar will this one look to the final draft? What does the committee do with the SEC? How about Indiana? The Big 12? We debate. And transaction season is nearing. We'll tell you which portal players we have our eye on and the best prospects out west ahead of signing day. All that and more as the 247 Sports College Football Show starts right now. Hello and welcome into the 247 Sports College Football Show. I'm Cooper Patagna. We got a great show for you this Friday. And guess what? We're going to start it off with some college football playoff talk. And without further ado, I'll pass it along to Emily Proud and Brad Crawford. Emily.
Taking a look at the latest college football playoff bracket, you got Oregon, Texas, Miami, and Boise State, the top 4 seeds we will discuss. They'll get the byes. Also, I'm going to give you some advice right now. Pack those heated benches for the first round. Indiana hosting Ole Miss, Penn State hosting Georgia, Notre Dame hosting Alabama, and Ohio State hosts BYU. Brad, brackets is here, and all I have to say is burr when I'm looking at those first round matchups. It looks absolutely freezing, but let's talk about the big news. I mean, we've talked about this, Brad Crawford, as a possibility, but now we're actually seeing it. BYU dropping those 8 spots after losing to Kansas, so they're 14. Boise State is 12, which means the Broncos get the bye. What do you think of this move?
I think it's the right move right now. The Big 12 does not look like a league that's better than what the G5 is going to put out there, which is going to be Boise State, Army, or Tulane. Boise State, obviously, one loss right now. Army coming up with a huge game this weekend against Notre Dame. Ashton Jeanty also still in the Heisman race. So if Boise State gets a first-round bye, I think you're going to see, Emily, the Big 12 champion, whether that's BYU, Colorado, maybe even Arizona State coming on strong late. One of those teams is probably going to get that 12 seed and go to 5 seed in the first round.
I heard you mention Army. We're going to talk about some games of consequence. I want to go ahead and jump to that one against Notre Dame because there is incredible consequence for both of these teams. So how does this game between Army and Notre Dame impact the playoff for each of these teams?
It's vital for both teams to win. I mean, Notre Dame right now looks like probably going to be an 11-1 team if they beat Army and then take care of business against USC. Notre Dame at 10-2, however, likely does not get in the playoff because we're going to see a log jam of SEC teams with the same record trying to get that spot. So big game for Notre Dame. And then you look at Army. G5's top seed would be Army if Army beats Notre Dame and then beats Tulane to finish unbeaten in the AAC. I think Army would then hop Boise State as that top G5 playoff team. So huge game at Yankee Stadium, Notre Dame, Army. Last time Notre Dame played a triple option team, they blew out Navy because Navy coughed it up. Army does not fumble all that often, though, so should be a great game this weekend between 2 top 20 teams.
I promise this is all connected, the conversation with the G5 and the conversation with the Big 12, and we're going to bring it all together here when we talk about BYU and Arizona State. Because first off, we have 2 Mountain West teams ranked in the bracket. We have 2 American teams ranked in the bracket. But when it comes to this BYU at Arizona State game, you want to talk chaos scenarios, Brad. How could the result of this game impact whether or not the Big 12 even gets a team in to the bracket?
How crazy would that be? I mean, Colorado right now has won several games in a row, does not have that bad loss except early in the season against Nebraska. I do think if Colorado runs the table and beats BYU or Arizona State in the Big 12 championship game, the committee's not going to leave out Deion Sanders, Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, the greatest show right now offensively college football has to offer. But there is that chaos scenario where the Big 12 champion does get left out. I know the commissioner there would want to grab the committee by the throat because that would be just a wild scenario if the G5 were to put 1 or maybe even 2 teams in if Army wins out and Boise State does as well. So looking forward to seeing what happens these next couple of weeks in the Big 12. BYU, Arizona State, a huge game Saturday. Kenny Dillingham, Sun Devils head coach, coming off a huge win and is actually favored in this game at home against the Cougars.
So am I hearing you correctly? Is Colorado the Big 12's best chance of making this playoff?
That's who I would have right now as the Big 12 favorite. I mean, right now they look unstoppable on offense, and Travis Hunter is leading the other side of the ball as well as the overwhelming Heisman favorite. So Colorado, I'm not ready to write the Buffaloes in Sharpie just yet, but they would be the team that I picked to win the Big 12.
Okay. I mean, this is a television show at its core, so that definitely makes for good TV anytime you got Deion in the postseason. Wow, what a comeback this would have been from last year to this year. Let's talk about the Big Ten. Indiana at Ohio State, a massive game of consequence. The committee seems to like the Hoosiers, having them up at number 5. You would think a loss to the number 2 team, which is Ohio State, wouldn't make much of an impact. But I don't know if you've been online lately, but the discourse surrounding undefeated Indiana, very different than what we've seen from the committee. So what are the possible outcomes of this game as it pertains to affecting IU's playoff resume?
Indiana can close the mouths of all the haters if they're able to go into Columbus and beat the Buckeyes. Indiana 10-0 right now, but only one of those 10 wins, Emily, has come against a team that's currently bowl eligible. 0 wins over top 25 teams. The Hoosiers don't have the strength of schedule. They don't have the resume, but what the playoff committee has shown us the last couple of weeks is unblemished records trump everything else. They trump game control. They trump strength of schedule, quality wins. How good you look, eye test is what they mention. And Indiana right now is 10-0. Nobody's beating them. So if Ohio State lays a crooked number and maybe blows out Indiana, then we're talking about the SEC possibly getting that 5th team in over a 4th Big Ten, which would be Indiana. So huge game for Indiana and Ohio State. Not just those 2 teams, but also a couple SEC teams who are looking to get one of those at-large spots too.
There's kind of shades of Florida State when it comes to Indiana, and not the fact that they, I'm knocking on wood right here. Curtis Rourke, I'm not putting this evil on you. I hope you stay healthy. It has nothing to do with the quarterback situation, but in terms of a resume that looks really good, but in the end doesn't get them into the playoff. So I heard you mention that based on how drastic this win could potentially look towards Ohio State if they do win this game, close losses are big. But we've talked about this before, Brad, the difference between a bad loss and good wins. This is a great loss, and they have no good wins. So how do you factor in Indiana to the discussion, given an 11-1 if they do end up losing?
Yeah, I think if Indiana keeps it competitive, maybe within the number, I think the line's around 2 touchdowns. I'm thinking a 34-20 type Ohio State win would be good enough for Indiana to still get in. I've had Indiana in the playoff as an 11-1 finisher for a month now. I think Kirk Cignetti and the Hoosiers have proved enough, even against a soft slate. Remember last year, Emily, Georgia played one of these softest schedules in college football and was 12-0 as a result before it lost to Alabama in the SEC title game and did not get in the 4-team playoff. But since we're in the 12-team era, a team like Indiana, if it finishes 11-1 with a respectable showing against Ohio State, I do think the Hoosiers are going to be partying in Bloomington.
I do like that Georgia comparison because sometimes it does come down to just one game that you need to win. And so potentially this is Indiana's one game that you need to win. Speaking of the SEC, nobody envied the committee having to deal with the logjam of those 2-loss SEC teams, all with very similar resumes. But I have a specific question I want to ask you. Ole Miss being 1 spot of Georgia. Alabama moves up 3 spots after beating Mercer. Congratulations to them. Now 4 spots ahead of Tennessee. So what did you learn about how the committee factors in head-to-head with all of those teams beating each other?
Yeah, a lot of folks on social media this week are talking about how did Alabama move up so many spots because they beat a non-power team in Mercer. The reason for that is 2 teams ahead of Alabama got beat, and that was BYU and Tennessee. I didn't necessarily agree with Tennessee's multi-spot drop. I see why BYU went from 6 to 14 because that team has been playing with fire for about a month now. But Tennessee right now, despite holding that win head-to-head over Alabama, they aren't seen as a comparable opponent right now. The committee loves Alabama for whatever reason more than Tennessee. Maybe it's a strength of schedule edge. Maybe it's Bama's win over Georgia about 2 months ago. Completely different teams now at this point. But I do think Tennessee is going to get into the playoff if it wins out and it gets some help elsewhere. Right now, Tennessee sits number 11 in the playoff rankings, which means if the season ended today, Emily, the Vols would be out of the mix because the G5 champion Boise State's behind them, and then BYU, Colorado, the winner of that game, as I projected, is going to make the playoff. So Tennessee does not control its own destiny, and right now, in late November, that connotation is kind of scary inside that locker room in Knoxville.
I think what's also kind of scary in general when it comes to the SEC is that because this is the first year of the 12-team college football playoff, we don't know how the committee is going to view championship games when it comes to the SEC championship. And normally, yes, you want to play in that game, right? You want to fight for that championship. There's also this risk versus reward, right? Where you could earn that bye if you win the SEC championship game, or you could drop to a 3-loss team who might not even make it. So we heard Lane Kiffin say this week that he's been talking with some coaches and he gets the feeling that you don't really want to play in that game. Brad, what's your take on that?
Yeah, there's going to be some angry Tennessee fans if Alabama makes it to that game, Emily, loses and finishes 10-3, and Tennessee at 10-2, one fewer loss than the Crimson Tide, and a head-to-head win over Alabama, still gets left out in favor of Alabama. Ward Manuel, the committee chair, was asked a couple weeks ago, how would they view runners-up in the conference championship games? And he didn't call it an exhibition game, but he said the entire body of work and the resume will be taken into consideration. So I do think Tennessee at 10-2 would get in over a Alabama SEC runner-up with 3 losses. I mean, because there's no way that I can fathom a team with a better record who also beat the team head-to-head that they're competing with not getting in the playoff. So Alabama right now would be sitting great if it did not make the SEC championship game, but if it wins out, Alabama's in.
I know I go kind of back and forth on this because it should help your resume to be good enough to make a conference championship game. But as we look at the SEC this year, are these teams actually better than each other if they make the championship game? Or is it these crazy tiebreaker scenarios that we have to go down 10 levels just to figure out who's in there? So it's not this big difference of it's an honor if you make it and it doesn't look as favorable on you if you miss it. I want to end here, Brad, just overall looking at what we've seen the committee do. If you had to put maybe a percentage on this, best team, which we've talked a lot about this week in terms of who would win in a neutral site and who would be favored and all these things, best team versus most deserving. If you had to put a percentage on it in terms of what the committee values, what would that be between those two factors?
I think best team. The committee, without saying it publicly, has beating around the bush about the eye test all season long. And I think right now, Ohio State and Oregon, those are the two teams that the committee feels best about. They've been 1-2 the last couple of weeks in the playoff rankings. I think the committee likes 5 or 6 SEC teams, but there's no way the SEC gets that many teams in. I think they're going to essentially cap it at 4 SEC teams. And there's going to be 4 Big Ten teams in it with Penn State and Indiana projected 11-1 each, both getting in as well. So I think eye test. I mean, you score a lot of points. Game control matters. That's why Indiana right now is unbeaten at number 5. We mentioned strength of schedule. That only comes into play when the committee meets for the final time after the conference championship games. If we're judging right now, Indiana would not be 5th. They're 5th because they're unbeaten and game control and the eye test, they've certainly passed it.
I understand eye test. Results should matter, though. It just, with eye test, it makes it so subjective, right? It's hard. It's hard to make this debate when you can't look at statistics and figures and facts and you're like, well, that team just looks better, but it should be the best teams competing for a national championship. So a lot left to be decided. So if you're angry with where your team is now, don't worry. A lot could change. Brad, thank you so much for breaking this incredibly confusing thing down for us. We do appreciate it each week. Cooper, back to you.
Thank you, Emily. Be sure to keep it locked into 247sports.com for the latest rankings, projections, and Brad's coverage of the playoffs down the stretch. The number 1 player in the 2025 class flips his commitment ahead of signing day. So how does that change the recruiting landscape? We'll discuss it all coming up next. It's silly season on the recruiting trail, and we already have fireworks. The number one player in the class of 2025, five-star quarterback Bryce Underwood has flipped his commitment from LSU to his hometown Michigan Wolverines. How did all of this happen? Let's bring in the man who has been all over this story from the beginning, our national recruiting analyst, Alan Trieu. Alan, welcome. I know that you have been extremely busy. There's been a lot of talk about this potentially happening, Bryce Underwood flipping his commitment from LSU to Michigan. How were the Wolverines and Jerome Miles able to get this one done?
Yeah, so several prongs to the attack. I think first, just dogged effort, making sure he knew he was a priority and how important he was to this class, which I don't even know that you can overstate how important he is to Michigan's recruiting efforts. And then an all hands on deck approach from the staff to alums, to the collective, to the guys in the class, to the guys who may end up joining him in the class, to the fans going to his playoff games recently. I mean, they threw everything they had at him and got it done, stayed the course. LSU made a really good play to keep him here late into their class. Michigan was undeterred by that, and I think the combination of immediate playing time as well as being, he grew up watching Michigan, it's close to home, and then Michigan able to get not only competitive in NIL, but also exceed what was already out there, helped all put together into this commitment.
Alan, I do want to ask you just kind of a one-off question. Obviously, being the number one player in the country, given Michigan's quarterback situation this year, what is the expectation for Bryce Underwood in Ann Arbor? Is this going to be a guy that's going to step in to that starting job, or is Michigan going to look elsewhere, potentially maybe in the transfer portal for a bridge type of quarterback?
Yeah, I think all of those things could happen. I think they probably will still look into the portal for a quarterback. They do have Jaden Davis, who was a heavily recruited guy from a year ago, but I think that's a room that they've wanted to fortify. That said, I do think the expectation is for Bryce to come in and compete for the job. And he told me previously in the summer that he was realistic. He knew he wasn't going to necessarily come in as the day one starter, but he wanted the opportunity. And he had looked at some guys in the past like Trevor Lawrence, who did not come in as the day one starter, but ended his freshman season as a starter. He felt he could do that. Now, I think you can look elsewhere in the conference and look at a guy like Dylan Raiola as a model for this is the best case scenario for a guy like Bryce to be able to come in, take the reins right away, kind of have the keys. And Raiola has lived up to the billing by my standard, and I think Bryce could do the same thing. But I don't think Michigan is done at the quarterback position. I think they will explore some portal options as well, and it sounds like Underwood was already made aware of that when he committed.
Alan, Michigan is not the typical strong finishers when it comes to recruiting. Before Bryce Underwood sitting inside the top 15, now inside the top 10, all of a sudden you look up, within 24 hours, a couple offers go out to guys like Jakeem Stewart in Louisiana, Isaiah Gibson, a five-star there in Georgia. What can we expect from the Wolverines with 12 days until National Signing Day?
I think you can expect a lot of movement. I think now it gets to the point where, like you said, it's flipped around to the point where they may have an issue with how much room do we have left. All these guys want to come. I know the phones have been ringing. A lot of recruits who had previously written Michigan off or maybe hadn't even considered Michigan at all are now wanting to speak to the staff, and they're going to use that to their advantage. They've already had some flip candidates on campus. Derek Meadows is a big one because he was committed with Bryce at LSU. There's some other guys coming in this weekend and even midweek. And so you're looking 25, 26. There's the whole board is now open to Michigan. So the next 12 days, I'd say Michigan fans need to buckle up, and there's going to be some new names that pop up that you either forgot about or weren't an option for Michigan before that may now become options.
Alan, appreciate it, man. Get that coffee machine ready. I know it's going to be a long couple days here until National Signing Day. Guys, just a reminder, you can find all of Alan's work at 247sports.com. Speaking of 247sports.com, it's the place to be for the latest news. Keep it locked in here, especially ahead of the drama of National Signing Day. We'll go in depth on the Indiana-Ohio State matchup a little later, but as we near the end of the regular season, teams are fighting for playoff spots and others might be losing players. We'll tell you some guys to keep an eye on in the ever-changing transfer portal. The transfer portal has been red hot over the last several years, as you see here. The numbers continuing to grow each season, more players available with the same amount of spots. So who stands out? And with that, let's welcome in college football analyst Smoke Dixon to help look at some players who can stand out above the rest. And Smoke, I'm glad to have you on. I've been doing some work here on the transfer portal over the last couple of weeks, and I thought a good topic to hit on is there's a couple guys that have already jumped in that I think after the next couple of weeks when the portal opens on December 9th, we're going to still be talking about these guys because of what they can add to a team. And the guy that I want to start with is at the quarterback position from Boston College. How about Thomas Castellanos? A pretty intriguing story, 61% completion rate this year, 18 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, over 1,000 yards passing as well, 1,000-yard rusher in 2023. Smoke, depending on who you talk to, it seems like the reviews are all over the place. The way you see him, how much can this guy help a potential Power 4 contender next year?
Well, Coop, think about this. What were we talking about last year with Vanderbilt? Nothing. It's Diego showed up. I think that's what Thomas can bring to a group. He can bring somewhat of a veteran quarterback, dual threat, that put in the right situation, you can see that he's been an improved passer since he was from 2023 to now. You've seen his ability to go through progression, make layer throws, but also has touch and timing vertically down the field. And when the play breaks down, Coop, this is one of the most electric guys with the ball in his hand. Yes, undersized, but again, what he brings is hope, opportunity, and the ability to be an experienced guy. And if you need someone to bridge a younger guy to come on, perfect.
Yeah, and I like that comparison a lot to Diego Pavia there at Vandy. I think, Smoke, with Thomas Castellanos more than anything, and we can say this about any quarterback, but the environment in terms of the scheme and the play calling is going to be so important to his success. I mentioned that. I mean, you think about what he did just a year ago, over 1,000 yards rushing, only around over 150 this year. So you think about that dynamic, the legs. You mentioned his ability to improvise, create explosive plays in the passing game or in the running game as well. It's going to be interesting to see what the market looks like there. Another interesting name coming out of the SEC and a former top 247 receiver just from 2 years ago in 2023 cycle, Jonte Cook. And we know Texas is kind of the land of some of the most dynamic receivers in the country. You go down the list of who they have: Ryan Wingo, Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond, Gunnar Helm at tight end. It seemed like Jonte Cook got squeezed out there a little bit. You and I were talking about it. Jonte Cook, in the right scheme, maybe as a primary slot receiver, this could be a high volume guy that could have a lot of potential to maybe kind of raise the ceiling of a passing game somewhere.
No doubt about it, Coop. When you cut the film on, what you see is a Z-slot version of a guy, 5'11", 180, 190-pound guy. That's sudden, shows you the ability to separate with quickness at the top of the break, but also has the ability to find zones, run away from man, and make those catches with those strong hands. Now, like we both said, he's not a number one option, but he can be a number 2, a number 3. Just don't ask for this guy to be an explosive receiver down the field in terms of being a vertical guy. But when you need those change moves, you need those tough catches and tough conflict positions, when you have coverage all over you, someone is draped all over your back, he shows you the ability to make those tough catches. And like you said, sometimes moving on to another place with better opportunities, more volume, you'll see that production in this guy. But at the end of the day, you're looking at a Z slot that can make the change move, and when you get in the red zone, be very efficient as well too.
Smoke, is this a little bit of a dangerous situation for Jonte Cook? I mean, leaving Texas, leaving Steve Sarkisian, the track record that he has developing receivers. A lot of people are flocking to Texas, right? I mean, we've heard about a lot of guys already that have been connected to Texas. We've seen what it's done for Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden coming over from Oregon State. You just kind of wonder, is the grass greener for Jonte Cook? This would be one of those situations. Quinn Ewers out, Arch Manning in, things are going to keep rolling, going to be more opportunity. To me, you know, it's easy to speculate as the armchair quarterback, but I would have been a lot more interested to say, all right, what does it look like in Austin if Jonte Cook were to stay?
No doubt about it, Coop. When you're going to a place and you're talking about working with Steve Sarkisian as an offensive coordinator, as a receiver, you love it because you know that he's not just going to feature one guy. He's going to be able to spread the ball around. And when you go into that offense, he prepares you now for the next level. And that's what most college receivers are looking for. The ability to play in college, but also have that next level NFL experience. And Steve Sarkisian brings that. And again, you talk about Arch Manning, one of the most dynamic quarterbacks. that come out and play with you and give you those production in terms of catches, throw the ball where you need it, I don't know if I would have left myself cool. But hey, listen, there might be grass that's greener on the other side, and maybe he's found it.
All right, let's talk about one of the sneakier prospects in the portal you and I have talked about. Let's talk about NC State edge Red Hibbler. I've talked to some teams about this guy. 7.5 sacks from a year ago, 2023. Only played 4 games this season. Smoke, I don't know about you. You turn on the tape. I get excited watching this dude.
Listen, cool. 4 down, defensive end, natural pass rusher. You see a guy that has good hand usage, understand how to work angles, plays with good leverage. For shorter, compact guy, you see long arms. He shows you the ability to get real skinny, and he's a tweener. At any point, you can now put him at the 3 technique in pass rushing situations right over the guard, and he can also get production. But we all were looking back last year, and we were thinking about who's going to be that next guy to come up. South Carolina found a guy, Kyle Kennard. This guy gives me a lot of Kyle Kennard feeling. Very good, explosive pass rusher, but also firm, can set the edge and give you that production in terms of being a run defender.
I'm with you, Smoke. A lot of value here, the position versatility. One of these guys you can't have enough of. Smoke Dixon, appreciate you joining us. We'll see a lot more of you in the next 2 weeks, man.
My man.
Guys, National Signing Day is on the horizon, and we'll look at some impact players out on the West Coast a little later. But first, Emily Proud sits down with our team site experts to break down a top 5 matchup in the Big Ten.
It's a top 5 battle in the Big Ten. Indiana may be the undefeated squad, but Ohio State has dominated this series. It's round 97, and the Buckeyes lead it 79-15-5. And Ohio State, they've won 29 straight against Indiana. But hey, the Hoosiers, they're doing things they have never done before, winning 10 games in a season for the first time in school history. Now, it may not be a matchup that we circled at the beginning of the season, but that's what makes the sport so great. We have Jared Kelly from Peaks.com and Dave Biddle from Bucknuts. And guys, we're just talking matchups here. Ohio State offense versus this Indiana defense. IU's defense sits at number 3rd nationally, but maybe that's an indictment on the types of offense that they have played. So Dave, I'll start with you. How can the Buckeyes hit Indiana with an offense that they have yet to see this season?
Yeah, Emily, Ohio State has a lot of respect for this Indiana defense. And talking to people over at Ohio State, they do feel like they can do some damage against this Indiana secondary. They have a lot of respect for the front 7. And Indiana's been a very good front 7 defense and a very good defense overall. But Ohio State feels good about some of the matchups that they can put out there as far as the deep passing game and even the intermediate passing game. And one thing about this Ohio State offense, they've been very balanced this year. Quarterback Will Howard and the top 3 wide receivers, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Carnell Tate, as well as both running backs Quinshawn Judkins and Travion Henderson, have been very good. So this is a balanced Ohio State offense. Something to keep in mind is, how will Ohio State's offensive line do against this good Indiana front? Ohio State still has a new look left side of the offensive line, although they will be entering their 4th game now with Donovan Jackson at left tackle and Carson Hinsman at left guard. But how will that Ohio State offensive line, so far so good with that new look left side, how will they do against this good Indiana defense?
Defensively for Indiana, you're looking at the number 3 ranked total defense in the nation, the number 1 run defense in the nation. For Indiana, I think the key to this one is really limiting Ohio State's run game. You got to shut down the 2-headed monster of Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins. Make Will Howard make those throws to win the game. And then defensively as well, you got to force Will Howard to make for some takeaways as well, because this is a game that Indiana's defense does not want to get into a shootout with Ohio State. We've seen Indiana, especially against Michigan, kind of struggle there offensively against top flight defenses. So for Indiana to really kind of shut down Ohio State's offense in the running game and really make Ohio State air the ball out, that's going to be a huge key for Indiana as well.
Yeah, you mentioned not wanting to get into a shootout. Indiana has done well in shootouts in the past, but man, coming off of this Michigan game, I'd say that they showed some weaknesses on offense. So how does that unit, Jared, bounce back against a really good Ohio State defense?
Yeah, against Michigan, we really saw Indiana's offense struggle for really the first time all season. Just put up 20 points against Michigan. I didn't really see Curtis Rourke, Heisman, one of the Heisman kind of front runners there. He struggled. Indiana's offensive line struggled to protect Curtis Rourke. Indiana's run game did not do well against Michigan either. And going into the Ohio State game, that Ohio State front seven is not going to get any easier for Indiana. So really the key for Indiana, you got to keep Curtis Rourke on his feet. You got to give him a clean pocket to work with, and then really just open up the rest of the run game that we did not see against Michigan. You have to be able to be balanced against Ohio State, not only running the ball, but also passing the ball. And we've seen what Indiana can do in the passing game this season, but if you can't run the ball, it's going to be very hard to beat this Ohio State defense.
And talking to Jim Knowles, Ohio State's defensive coordinator, earlier this week on Tuesday, I mean, he said this Indiana offense is absolutely legit. Not that he's breaking news there, but they've got a very good quarterback, obviously, in Curtis Rourke, who's number 2 in the country in passing efficiency. Ohio State's Will Howard is 3rd. They got 2 good running backs. They got 3 good receivers. They got a good offensive line. So they've got a lot of respect for this Indiana offense. And Ohio State's been very good defensively this year overall, and they've been very aggressive. Can they get off the field on 3rd down? That's a big key. And Indiana has not broken out the quarterback run this year because they haven't had to. If you look at Curtis Rourke's stats this year, you would think, oh, he's not a running threat. 17 rushing yards on the season. He had 800 career rushing yards, over 800 career rushing yards at Ohio University. So I wonder if Indiana has been kind of saving that. Ohio State's coaches were talking about that earlier this week. That's something they have to keep in mind. So again, I mean, this is a very good Indiana offense with a veteran 6th-year senior quarterback, very good coaching, and Ohio State feels like this is the 2nd best offense they'll face all year behind only Oregon.
Wow, looking forward to this one. And I kind of joked that this matchup is not necessarily one that we all had circled back in August, but all of a sudden, guys, it's super important to the Big Ten title race, to the college football playoff race. So I want to know what the mindset is for both of these teams going into this incredibly consequential game. So Dave, let's start with the Buckeyes. How are they feeling?
They're feeling good. They know they have a very great opportunity to flip the narrative a little bit, because entering this month, Emily, Ohio State was 2-6 against top 5 teams during the Ryan Day era, and he heard a lot about that. 2-6. Then they beat Penn State, so now he's 3-6. They beat Indiana, he'll be 4-6, so he'll have twice as many this month that he had during his first 5 years at Ohio State. So huge game. It's great for the Big Ten to have 4 teams ranked in the top 5. It's great to see Indiana being a legit, really good team who I think is a lock to make the college football playoff. But Ohio State knows this is a huge game. They were talking on Tuesday. They're making sure the fans know they got to come out. And, I've never seen this before for an Ohio State-Indiana game, where you got the coaching staff and the quarterback saying we need the fans to come out and really be crazy for this game, even though it's a noon kick. So much on the line here, no doubt about it.
Indiana coach Chris Agnetti has said all season, we operate best when we have a chip on our shoulder, when we're the underdog. And this is the first game all season that Indiana is going to enter as the underdog, according to the betting favorites or the betting odds. And Kurt Agnetti, I think, kind of relishes in that, and so does his team. You think about this team, a bunch of group of 5 transfers, a bunch of guys who were lowly recruited out of high school. Going into this game, going on the road to Ohio State, this is a game where Indiana probably shouldn't be in the spot that they're in, number 5th in the nation, obviously in the college football playoff talk as well. Indiana's going to go in there with a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to try to make a statement here, not only for the Big Ten title race, but also what it could mean for their college football playoff hopes.
Well, let me go ahead and add some more chips to that shoulder for Kurt Cignetti, because we simulated this game 20 times on EA College Football 25, the video game. Take from this what you will, but they had Ohio State winning 13 of those 20 times. So let's start with the virtual victors here. And Dave, what's the biggest key to pulling out a win in the real football game Saturday?
Yeah, Emily, aside from the obvious, like if one team has like a 3-0, advantage in the turnover battle, I go back to this game's going to be won at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. If Indiana's able to win the battle of the trenches, Indiana's going to have a very good chance of winning this game. If Ohio State wins the battle of the trenches on both sides of the ball, Ohio State's probably going to win this game. So there's a lot of factors, but I'll be old school and say that whoever wins the battle of the trenches on both sides of the ball will win this game.
For Indiana, it really comes down to limiting the explosive plays. We've seen in the past what Ohio State can do, especially in this, contest with Ohio State, how much that sort of athleticism difference, the talent difference has hurt Indiana. Indiana has to be able to limit those 50, 60-yard plays that go for long gains. And if they can do that and kind of force Ohio State to put together sustained drives, put together those touchdown drives that are long, that burn a lot of clock, Indiana should give itself a chance to win this one.
I love it. Guys, thank you both so much for the great breakdown. All of a sudden, here we are, week 13, and Indiana and Ohio State is far and away the biggest game on Saturday. Keep it locked into Peaks.com for all things Indiana sports and Bucknuts.com for everything you need to know about Ohio State. Coop, back to you.
We're less than 2 weeks from the biggest day on the recruiting calendar. So we head out west to visit with our national recruiting analysts to talk about some of the biggest prospects on the West Coast ahead of National Signing Day. Welcome back to the 247 Sports College Football Show. I'm joined now with the best in the country, not just the best in the West, but Blair Angulo and Brandon Huffman. And Blair, I want to start with you. A lot of things have been shaken here on the West Coast over the last couple of days. 12 days until National Signing Day. Hassan Longstreet flips his commitment from Texas A&M to USC. But it seems like Texas A&M's got something in the works as they're working on five-star receiver commit to USC, Jerome Miles.
Yeah, Coop, you know, we love our earthquakes out west, so there's been some seismic activity. If signing day were today, I don't think that Jerome Miles would sign with the USC Trojans. I think right now is really leaning towards Texas A&M, and when you follow the visits, and that's something that we really do in recruiting, you have to feel good about the Aggies being able to reel him in this 2025 cycle, despite losing Hassan Longstreet recently to the USC Trojans. Longstreet, interestingly enough, had been recruiting Jerome Miles to join him in College Station. Now the assumption is that he is doing the same to get him to stay in Los Angeles and team up for USC. But this has been all over the place, and Huff can attest to this. He was in Salt Lake City to host Jerome's announcement back in early September. Jerome Miles initially committed to Ole Miss on an official visit there to Oxford in April. He was a silent commit to Utah a number of times during this process, gets a late offer from USC in late August, commits to the Trojans a couple weeks later, and now it looks like the momentum is on Texas A&M's side.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a nice bounce back if A&M can pull this off, considering they lost Longstreet to USC, and now you can go get a big play receiver, an explosive wide receiver, one of the fastest players in the country in this class, a playmaker. I mean, we saw what he did in the early part of the season, was instrumental in their win over IMG Academy earlier in the year. They ended up winning a state championship on Thursday night. And Miles is just a dynamic player, maybe one of the most skilled players to come from the state of Utah, at least since Puka Nacua. Coop, I know you had a big role in that one, but Jerome Miles, there's a reason why Ole Miss wanted him early on, why Michigan was pursuing him, why so many national programs went after him. It's that size and that speed combination, his big playability, and Texas A&M would love to get the Trojans back and flip Miles to the Aggies.
Huff, the quarterback dominoes, they've been falling. I mean, you look around, Hassan Longstreet, who we talked about, Bryce Underwood, the number one player in the country, Julian Lewis out there to Colorado as well. One of those names that we haven't talked a lot about, Jiren Kiave Sangapula Tele, hopefully I got that right. But Georgia getting a visit this weekend as they play Massachusetts. Cal trying to hold on here. What can you tell us in the latest of the Hawaiian signal caller?
Yeah, there's actually some late breaking news on that one. He pushed the visit to Georgia back to next week. He'll be there for their game against Georgia Tech next Friday. So he'll spend Thanksgivings down in Athens. And why is that big? Well, that means that Cal can now have him on campus this weekend. It'll be an unofficial visit, but with Cal hosting Stanford in the big game, they have arguably the most important recruit that Justin Wilcox has ever recruited since he's been the head coach at Cal. This is the kind of quarterback that come in and start as a true freshman. And now Cal will have that chance to lock him up, sew him up 100% for this class this weekend. They're going to try to convince him to stick with Cal, to spurn Oregon, who had him in for an official visit last month, and to keep him from taking that visit to Georgia next weekend. Cal would love nothing more than for Jiren to say, I'm done with visits. I'll be signing there during that first week. If he does not wrap things up on the visit this weekend, he goes to Georgia, then all bets are off. Oregon going to try to get him. Georgia has that last chance, and Cal just will be holding on for dear life like they've been for the last couple of months anyways.
This recruitment, Huff, reminds me a lot of Dillon Gabriel from a number of years ago. Dillon Gabriel obviously ended up at UCF, but people forget that Georgia was making a late charge for him. USC got him in Los Angeles for an official visit as well. So maybe Cal is playing the role of UCF here. Oregon has gotten so much of the buzz. I was actually talking to one of the committed prospects earlier this week, and he said that Jiren is in those group text messages with some of the other guys that are headed to play in Eugene. They aren't pushing him to join him there, but they are being very supportive and obviously asking him, what he's feeling and telling him that Oregon would be a great place for them to all make an impact for Dan Lanning and company. So I think the Ducks right now have to feel good about their chances, but these last 2 weekends are going to be very, very interesting. As you mentioned, Coop, the dominoes continue to tumble.
Yeah, you talk about one of the more intriguing quarterbacks to follow here down the stretch. And obviously, Underwood, Julian Lewis, those guys going to steal the headlines. But anybody that's been following this guy for quite some time, especially you guys, know how good of a player this guy can be. Let's talk about one of the top prospects out west, uncommitted prospects, top 100 linebacker, Madden Faramo, yet to make a decision. You look at the contenders here, Notre Dame, USC, Texas, Washington, kind of feels like a throwback recruitment a little bit, Blair. What can you tell us about when a decision could be potentially made here?
Well, it's going to have to be soon because signing day is just around the corner, but this has kind of been dragging out. And I think, interestingly enough, Madden would even say that he didn't anticipate to still be on the board this late in the recruiting process. He initially announced that he would hopefully be ready to make a commitment before the start of his senior season. That didn't happen. He has now continued to take visits. He's been out to a number of games this fall, went out to Washington, has been to basically every USC home game, has been to Notre Dame twice, which isn't an easy travel from Southern California, especially after a Friday night high school football game. He is focused on his own season. That season has come to an end. CIF Southern Section playoffs. Jay Serra was knocked out last week. The weekend that he was looking to potentially get out to Texas was this weekend, but Madden revealed to me earlier this week that he would not be in Austin. So it does sound like this is a battle between Notre Dame and USC, the Trojans being the hometown favorite, the school that he grew up rooting for and going to campus a number of times. The Fighting Irish, maybe the best relationships that he has built. So it definitely has an old school flavor to it, Coop. Like you mentioned, it's kind of one of those tussles right now where you start to see some blue bloods, and Madden has been taking his time with the process.
During the summer, it looked like he was all but wrapped up for Notre Dame. I was at Punahou High School in July and talking to Ko'okia, one of the Irish early commits in the 2024 class, or 2025 class, linebacker. He was on his official visit the same weekend that Faramo was, and he said that they felt great that he was going to join that linebacker class at Notre Dame. Well, now here we are in late November. We're 4 months removed from that, and he still hasn't made a decision. So why should Notre Dame worry? Well, the longer this recruitment takes, the closer you get to signing day. This is more often than not when the home team starts to make their surge and keeps the guy local. If he wanted to go to Notre Dame, there's probably a chance he could have committed there a long time ago. So Lincoln Riley has been playing the long game, getting him to visit multiple times during the season, getting him to multiple games at the Coliseum, just being, an hour and a half up the road. Those are certainly factors that USC has in their favor. Now, maybe he's waiting for the Notre Dame USC game at the Coliseum next Saturday. That'll be 4 or 5 days before the early signing period. Maybe that'll be the tiebreaker. But what it does look like is it's going to come down to the Irish or the Trojans. But can USC keep him in the Southland? Does that game have any impact? Probably not. But that's just one more thing to weigh in this factor with where will Madden end up.
Yeah, and just to add a cherry on top there, Huff, Madden Faramo will be at the Coliseum next weekend to watch both of those defenses go head-to-head. So he's going to be keeping a very close eye on what's happening on the field there inside the Memorial Coliseum.
Exciting times ahead. We talked about it. The quarterback dominoes, certainly a storyline to follow. Madden Faramo, one of those guys. Keep an eye on, one of the best players in college football nobody is talking about. Brandon Huffman, Blair Angulo, appreciate it as always. We'll see you guys soon. And we will see them soon. December 4th is National Signing Day. You can find it right here on the 247Sports YouTube channel. That will be from 10 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to like and subscribe, guys. Like I said, for Brandon Huffman, Blair Angulo, I'm Cooper Tagan. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.